It's Sunday, August 13th, 2017, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today, we're joined by one of our mentors, Harikrishna Menon, a product manager at 2 Sigma, to lead a talk on lean customer development. So those of you maybe haven't joined us before, this is the Product Mentor, and our mentors do a lot of talks in the program. We open it up to as many people as we can. The Product Mentor program is in over 20 countries around the world. And they get paired up, one mentor and one mentee for the duration of a session, and we're currently in session 7 to help make better product people, better product decision, and sometimes better products as well. With that said, let me just, I want to do some quick introductions, go around the room. I'm going to start with the person closest to my left, at least on the screen, and we're going to go to Vipul. Just to briefly introduce you, who are you? Are you a mentor or a mentee? Where are you? And anything else you might want to add about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vipul Masale. I'm a product manager working for Cornerstone On Demand, based out of Santa Monica, California. We are one of the world's leading talent management companies, and I'm a mentee.
Outstanding. And over to Shirzad.
Hi everyone, my name is Shirzad. I'm based out of Berlin. I'm a product manager at Here Technologies. And yeah, I'm a mentee.
Rashid?
Hi, I'm Rashid Manzar. I'm based out of Toronto, and I'm a mentee and product manager at ADP.
John?
Hey everyone, I'm John Kress. I'm a product manager at Barnes & Noble on the mobile applications based in the East Village of New York, and I'm a mentee in the program.
Harikrishna?
Hi, I'm a mentor at the product group. I'm a product manager in 2 Sigma Investments, a hedge fund based out of New York, and their platform engineering team.
Mentor in the Product Mentor program, to be more specific. And I am Jeremy Horn, aka the Product Guy, and I'll be moderating here today. So as you guys have questions about the topic, post them to the Q&A section directly below the video. So if you're on the productmentor.com/live, videos at the top, questions are at the bottom, just post them. As long as they're topically related, I'll get them over to Harikrishna in fairly real time. If they are more generic product management or life questions, I will still ask him those questions for you, but I'll save them till the end of the talk. But with all of that said, let's get going with the talk. I'll hand it over to you, Hari.
I'm here to talk about lean customer development. So I'm going to start with a little anecdote. Around 2 years ago, I don't know how many of you know how product management works at Microsoft, but Microsoft traditionally probably started the product management role in its truest sense around 25 years ago when Excel came into being. The role has gone through a number of transitions. Essentially, until probably 3 years ago, it was a mix of being a project manager and a program manager. What it meant was, hey, you plan out your team's releases, you plan out every single schedule, you run your scrums, you run the boards, do everything that you can. In addition to talking to customers, designing features, speccing these humongous 60 to 100 page specs out that last your releases for that last for releases up from 1 to 3 years. A couple of years ago, the kind of focus a little changed. We soon realized that Microsoft being at that point, Microsoft was very focused on the Windows ecosystem. So we kind of knew what we want to build. But when we were going to mandate to go make money wherever we wanted to, it was really hard for us to build the right product for our customers because we had no idea what folks in Linux or Mac or people outside of a developer ecosystem or outside of using our platform wanted us to build. So it was a very new experience for the entire program management team. So we started thinking about how do product managers operate out in the wild in startups and other companies like Google and Facebook. And the whole discipline changed a bit. One of the key things that introduced that change is lean customer development. This is, it's a popular term in the lean startup series. And luckily for us, the person who wrote the book, Cindy Alvarez, was a user researcher in Yammer, and she kind of trained one of large parts of the program management organization into really understanding what lean customer development was and how to use that to build really good products that people will buy. So one of the direct outcomes of this, we doubled the active user base of Visual Studio from around 1.5 million to 3 million kind of following some of the principles outlined in that process and how generally people think about product management. So I want to give you a feel of like how it, what the process looks like. It's more of an academic understanding of what of all the things that we do inherently as product managers. So what is lean customer development? It's basically an expanded version of build, measure, learn. You form a hypothesis, and the hypothesis could be as a customer, we feel that debugging X or Y service in the cloud is hard. Then you find potential customers who you think generally has this problem or generally has this core pain point. Then you interview as many as customers as possible. This is a statistically significant group that, like Jordan mentioned as well as what came up in one of the questions. Finding the customer is not enough. You have to ask the questions the right way. You should not lead them. They should be able to proactively tell of their pain points, and that is the way you should be able to validate a hypothesis. Once you get to that, you have you probably do 30 to 60 interviews. At the end of the day, you have so much information. Like, how do you collate all that info and try to understand what your product direction should be? And finally, you go build something that you believe your customers wanted, measure, keep learning, repeat the process over and again as many times as you need. Now, I want to jump into specific steps of this process. The first one is forming a hypothesis. It always starts with, I believe, a type of person. In my example, when I was at Microsoft, it was always a developer. So I believe a developer experiences a kind of problem. A problem could be anywhere between they find it hard to build services in a PaaS infrastructure like Azure or Google Cloud or AWS, while performing a task. A task for that would be solving a business problem for their company or building a service or an application that the company really wants, and then they grow to their success. There are two kinds of hypotheses. The one that you start off with is problem hypotheses that you essentially come up in very early part of the product planning process. You have a set of hypotheses that you want to validate. And when you validate the hypotheses, you might come with a set of solution hypotheses that you think are the right ways to approach and fix the problem. That possibly also requires more talking to customers to make sure you're building what they really need and not building something that you think is the best product out there. Focusing on the problem is very important. When you think about problem hypotheses, you're not thinking about the feature or the design or how you're going to actually sell it to your customers. It's purely focused on really understanding what are the key points your customers are facing today with your product. It should be very testable. That means it should not be either really broad or really narrow or of not sufficient depth that you can never make sense of the answers. If you had examples where your hypothesis is overbroad and you have to take a set of statements from n number of customers to make sense of it, then that's not a good hypothesis. You have to break down a hypothesis that will essentially be answered by many customers when they're talking to you about their pain points. As narrow as you can get is better. So let's say you have a problem hypothesis. Now, the next step would be finding customers. This is actually was pretty hard for us especially as Microsoft, when we started thinking about folks in Linux or in the Mac OS or in using other cloud services, we had to really dig hard to find the right people. Some of the common things that we used was LinkedIn. Obviously, everyone has great networks. We can reach out to a few folks and see if they're interested in chatting us for 15 minutes. Reddit, especially, if you do Reddit religiously, you would know certain subreddits that are very core to your domain. Making a name for yourself out there, getting some karma, establishing some rapport with some folks there makes it much easier for you to get them into a call with you so you can really understand their pain points and their key concerns. Facebook, surprisingly, for certain set of products really well. Certain set of products it doesn't. Twitter is another great avenue because if you follow the key influencers that your product line actually speaks to, then you would find a lot of followers who follow those influencers, and then you can reach out to them or DM them to see whether they would be a good fit for you. Quora is often overlooked, but an actually really good source of this info because being a very moderated, very rich a site that has a lot of editorial oversight, you do find really good nuggets of information and the kind of customers that you might want to reach out to, or at least some headway into, hey, these are possible companies that might be interested in my solution or have issues with the kind of, or have issues in the space that I'm exploring, and that would be interesting. Then you can follow up on LinkedIn and go find the right people. domain-specific websites, you do find a lot of these really very niche websites that possibly talk about certain parts of your product. And following those websites, trying to find user information, there's another one. Real-world locations, one of the interesting things that we did, we actually, as a part of the exercise, we had to go stand, it was nothing great a product, but we literally had to go stand in a bus stand or like the train station and talk to random people about some hypothesis we're doing. It was to get the confidence up the product and program managers to really get out there, not be shy, like think out of the box and how the ways you want to interact with your customers, as well as it really helped us like solidify the 5-minute elevator pitch that we wanted to tell our customers that, hey, this is why you should talk to us. Funnily enough, people have used Craigslist in the past. Personally, I have found it completely useless, but for certain aspects, certain products that you might be building, Craigslist is also a really good example. In my last slide, I have given a link to a blog post that somebody wrote, like 95 ways to find your customer, which is pretty interesting. It's an exhaustive list of the different kind of sources you can reach out to find the customers you're talking to about. This is especially important when you are in the very nascent stages of your product, when you really don't have a product, you're trying to break into a new market. If you have an established product, you can use things like the customer advisory board that Jordan talked about. You might have established really good connectivity with a set of customers that you can call up on a bi-weekly basis to talk to them. But when you're starting in a new area or a new segment that you have no exposure to, you have to really get out there. You have to go find the right people to talk to. And these are some of the ways that you can. Let's say you found customers. Let's say like you have tried your best. You possibly, you didn't have time or you were not successful in finding the right customers. You can do a couple of other things. There's a bunch of user research platforms like Validately, UserZoom, Etnia that you can reach out to. And if you give them a very good write-up of this is the kind of customer I'm looking for, this is the market segment, this is the age, demography, everything that you need, they would actually go out there and try to find the set of customers you want to talk to. An issue with this approach is that they generally will never share the customer emails or anything with you. They will do all the meeting calls and everything set up by themselves. So you're probably not going to build your exhaustive database of people you want to reach out in the future, but at least it's a good way if you don't have the time or if it's really urgent for you to reach out to one of these platforms to do that work for you. We have even done Mechanical Turk. We basically scraped a bunch of emails that we thought was interesting. We paid some folks in Amazon Mechanical Turk to go scrape all these emails and give a list of emails that we could use to reach out to some other customers. There are other things like affiliate programs. You could leverage partnerships with other companies. One that's often overlooked is if your company has been for a while and has a bunch of partners, there are a lot of data sharing agreements that you as a product manager might not know that exists. So there's no harm in reaching out to your business and saying, hey, is your partner sharing some customer data with us? Is there a way for me to get in the CRM system? And is there a way for me to get those emails, those contact information out so I can reach out to those customers? So at least in Microsoft, because we have a significant partner program, we were able to actually use some of our partnerships to get to the right set of folks that we want to talk to. You might know better ways to find customers, but these kind of gives you an overview of what you can do by yourself to find customers, as well as use user research platforms or leveraging partnerships to find the right set of folks to talk to. Let's say you found that your customers, right? You have to have a script. What are the right questions? So I personally believe only in asking 5 questions for my entire interview. And I try to stick to those 5 questions irrespective of the problem I'm solving, especially in my early stages of product, a problem hypothesis, because I felt those questions have gotten me the maximum mileage without ever leading my customers down into answering the questions or giving the problems that I want them to tell me or I want to hear. So the first one is like, it should basically be things like, hey, what are you doing today? How do you accomplish tasks? Just listening to that gives you a whole lot of ideas about what the current pain points of customers are. Specifically asking about pain points makes a customer think about, hey, what am I really doing that really pisses me off? There's this very good analog, rats, vets, and dents. If you had a rat in a house, you would call the exterminator the very next day or right that moment, because that is something you cannot live with. A dent in your car, if it's not too much, you probably wouldn't be that worried about it. You might, go for a couple of 3-4 months before you think about taking it to a shop and getting that fixed. So it is really important when a customer talks about their pain points for you to differentiate between rat and dents. Rats, if you can solve a rat kind of problem for the customer, they will change their behavior to buy their product. But if you're just trying to solve a dent problem, there is no guarantee they're going to change their behavior to buy or use your solution. So it's very important when a customer talks about their pain points for you to empathize and really understand what rats and dents are. Deal breakers and constraints. These come a lot more useful when you're thinking about solution hypothesis. When you give a solution hypothesis to a customer and ask for his feedback, it would be really interesting to understand what are the key deal breakers. Are there any security, regulatory, et cetera, constraints that they cannot ever get around with and has to be part of your final solution? Also, it is important for you to understand what the decision process for buying looks like. You might be talking to, let's say, a really senior principal architect or an architect of the company to talk about your solution, but it's not necessarily he's the right person to make the decision to buy your product. It could be his managing director, it could be a VP. So it's really important for you to understand, hey, how does the decision process in a company work, and how you as a product manager can work with your business and sales team to enable the customer who's interested in your product to actually start the decision-making process and navigate that successfully. That might include you giving a couple of pitch decks, a couple of easy-to-use material that they themselves can then take up to their management and get more information about. Finally, the interview. Digging a little more into the interview, the first question that you always do is you should always ask, outside of your intro and saying hi, is tell me how you do your job today. And it is okay to have huge moments of silence. I know it's awkward, but when you're silent, you make the customer talk more. A lot of people really like, to hear their own voices, and you just have to encourage them a little bit. So when you just ask this question, you can really understand what they do today to actually solve a problem. And from that, you'll be able to get a better understanding what a rat versus a dent is. Once that question is done, you might want to ask to get a little sense of competitor, a market understanding. Do they use any existing tools or processes to get their same work done? It gives you, you might have done a lot of research to understand what your market looks like, what your competitors look like, but this question also might give you more information about other users or other companies that you have overlooked during your research, and that gives you pointers to go and dig into more going forward. Once you get a basic understanding of how they work around the issues today and what kind of tools and processes they use, then you talk about the biggest pain points. So this is the meat of the conversation. This is when the customer is encouraged to tell you about the things that really piss them off, things that really depress them, the things that they feel that they don't want to come to the work the next day for. And you have to get as much information about this from your customer as possible. When you have a set of customers that talk about the same pain point, now you know, hey, there are some ideas that are coalescing together. There are some problems that are more important than other problems. And then you can focus on building the solution hypotheses for those kind of issues. Finally, the one fun question I always ask is, like, if you had a magic wand and it could change anything about how you do your task today, what would it be? People have come with some crazy answers that might be completely outside the realm of what your product is trying to solve. But it is interesting to just say that, because a set of these magic wand answers give you somewhat of the North Star or the epsilon of what your product could be in the longer term. So this question kind of gives you an understanding of what the aspiration for the customer is. Like, where does he really see his workflow being, like, 3 or 4 years from now? And it gives you also an understanding what your product could be in 3 or 4 years from now to make the process easy for your customers as possible. Finally,
so we just had a question come in from Rashid. Rashid, I think your question, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sure, Jeremy. So Hari, my question is, product managers are expected to do customer development. At the same time, some companies have UX researchers as well who do the user research. How our approach should be similar to or different from that of UX researchers research? And should we partner with them, or is it fine to delegate this activity to them?
Interesting question. And even at my previous job, we did have user researchers. They are a resource like any other, right? I have always felt that you as a product manager could delegate some tasks. For example, if they are working with an external resource like Etni or things like that, you can make the US researcher help you navigate that. But I've always felt you have to be part of the conversation. You could be a silent partner, but you have to listen to that conversation. You could let the UX researcher lead the process in many cases, but you have to be present. Because it's really difficult to convey empathy. Even really good user researchers find it hard to really communicate like what the customer was saying, and they might have a different perspective from you. But when you're in the conversation, when you really hear that, it makes a huge amount of difference. They're like any other resource. You have to use them because it makes your job easier, and that's why they are there. But you should not skirt out of the fact that, hey, let them go do everything. Let them give me the write-up. I'm just going to trust that blindly, and that's what I'm going to use. Some good UX researchers also tape all the conversations, right? So if you can't really make it, I would highly encourage you to listen to the tapes, because that also gives you a sense of understanding of empathy. But, that is a key part. Like if you just trust a write-up from a UX researcher, you might be missing a key empathy or the key emotion the customer was displaying when they were talking about certain problems. But they're a resource, and you should definitely use them.
Okay. So how much say should they have in the designing questions or defining questions?
That's an interesting question. So, some UX researchers have, let's say, a degree in cognitive psychology, right? They might be really good at, if you give a question to them, they might be like, hey, Rashid, this is probably not the right way to ask it because this is leading the customer on. Since I've always as a research, if they really know what they're talking about, you should help them make those decisions. And if you really have a strong pushback, and as Jordan said, if you have facts or data or anything that backs you up, that tells you this is not the right way to do things, you as a product manager, I think, has a final say in how you really want to use research, right? But these people sometimes have a lot of experience and have a really good understanding because they've done it for so long, and you should always value their feedback. But as I said, at the end of the day, the buck stops with you, because all this data becomes a fundamental part of defining a roadmap. So you have to make the final decision. You have to really make sure that you understand what the user researchers are doing and what the data they're collecting and how that actually correlates to your product.
Yep. Thank you.
Awesome. So next question goes to Nis.
Hey, so I know I tuned in a little late here, but what are some KPIs or just ways for measuring your performance when doing lean customer development?
That's a good question. So we exactly, this comes back to the statistically, significant number. What Cindy told me was very simple. She said, if you're hearing the same thing from customers, then it's time to stop, right? At some point in your interview process, you end up at a spot where you're listening to the exact same thing. And she was of the opinion that you never stop until you get to that point. When you heard everything that your customers has to say, at that point, that is like her perspective was, that is a key KPI that you have to track. Another thing that I personally have found, if not KPI, is that sometimes when you do your research, you find the right person. It sometimes ends up being you don't find the right people at all. And that means their answers or the pain points does not correlate to anything what you're trying to do. At that point, it's okay to cut the conversation off, say hi, bye, it's okay, thanks for your time, let's move on. Given the fact that product managers have a lot more things than just user research on their plate, I think from a time perspective, I have always thought about it depends on the stage of the problem. If I'm doing a very early design or a new scenario or a completely new set, trying to break a new market segment, I have personally done anywhere between 16 to 30 customer interviews to get there. But if it was for just a minor feature improvement, I would just rather trust my customer advisory board or one or two customers that I have previously mentioned this issue to me, and I would just circle back with them on a solution hypothesis. But I think the key KPI, because it's so emotional, it's so behavioral driven, I think the key KPI for you to keep in mind is that you stop when you have started hearing the same thing again and again.
Cool. So we don't have any other questions right now. Keep them coming in at theproductmentor.com/live. And with that said, back to you, Harikrishna.
Making them talk. It's really hard. I have felt, I've seen customers who can't shut up. They will just keep going and going, which is good for us. And I've seen customers it's really, really hard to elicit any sort of valuable feedback from them. The best weapon in your armory is a minute of awkward silence. If you're not going to say anything, you don't have to fill in that void. You don't have to say a word. Just stay silent. At some point, it's like who's going to blink first. If you have the discipline, they're going to blink first and they're going to start talking again. And that's a good way for you not to interject, change the conversation, move to a different level, or try to do anything to it. Let them talk about what their key pain points are. Don't ever ask binary questions. No question should have a yes or no answer. It should always be followed by something like what, when, how, why. Right? Even if they say they have an issue, but you really have to understand why do they have the issue. If you had something else, what would you do? Keep digging, because that's when you really understand. Again, I come back to the rats and dents analogy, but binary questions never let you understand that difference. But when you try digging more, it'll give you more perspective on what's a rat versus a dent. Moving on. So questions. So some common questions that folks have talked to me about when I've talked about lean customer development is that how long is a good interview? Essentially, if you're a product manager, I do get a lot of vendors trying to sell me stuff, and it always starts off with, hey, can I have 15 minutes of your time? And I've realized 15 minutes, nothing ever happens in 15 minutes. By the time you get all the audio, video, everything figured out, it's a good 5 minutes gone, and 5 minutes of intro and 5 minutes done. What I've always felt was, they might go against, set theory, but for me, I've felt the sweet spot to always be 30. And I've felt when you're upfront with your customer that you need 30 minutes, it's a little trust thing, right? You're never going to go overboard. You know your interview script by heart, so you can land in 30 minutes. But this 15-minute conversation has always felt not the right amount to me. And I don't believe in 15 minutes, you probably end up learning enough to satisfy your curiosity and get enough data for you to make decisions for your product. Another one is compensation. I've seen a lot of customers who are happy to talk to me without any sort of compensation. But I've seen a lot of customers who probably will be like, hey, what's in it for me? Especially when you go through platforms like Validately, you have to pay them to get the right set of customers. One of the key things that I felt about compensating more than money or Starbucks gift cards and things like that, I've always told them if they are an existing user of my product, you have a get out of jail free card. I will help you if you have an issue, whatever it will be, whether it will be in Microsoft, you just let me know. I'm going to follow up and make sure that your problem is solved. That I felt like the trust level with the customers really went up because I used to follow through. If they have an issue, like I used to work in Visual Studio and Azure, but if they had an issue in Internet Explorer, I would literally go up to Internet Explorer PMs and say, hey, one of the customers has a problem. Can you help them with it and hound them until the problem is done? So I felt something like, especially if you're working in a large organization and there are multiple departments and your customer is it has an existing account or uses your product, a good way of compensation is getting out of jail free card. The second thing is that a lot of customers don't really get face time with the product people, right? It's really rare sometimes for them to talk to the direct product manager or the head of engineering or yada, yada about their problems. So always leave time at the end of the interview for them to ask you questions. Tell them, hey, as a part of the interview, I'll be happy to answer any and all questions I can answer about this product or this space. And you basically share your expertise with them on your product and your domain, and they've always appreciated it. Or phone. If you can, always in person is good. So if I was in Seattle, I was always try getting a coffee with them, a 30-minute coffee. I would buy them a cup of coffee and chit chat. It was also great because that really helped me understand emotions a lot better. Otherwise, phone. Record. Always ask customers whether you can record the conversation. This feels like, most good product managers do, but sometimes you forget. But it's always important if you really, as Jordan said, it's a sales guy or a business guy comes and tells you, like, where is your data? Like, who told you about this? How many customers told you about this? It's always good to have that thing in your kitty where you say, hey, I have 30 customer interviews. Everything is recorded. If you're interested, please go. Here's a link. Go watch it and let me know if you felt that I misunderstood their pain points or things incorrectly. The recording is always good, but always ask the customer. Permission before you do it. And finally, like when to stop. And my perspective on lean customer development has always been you stop when you start hearing the same thing over and over again. till that you keep continuing because you probably have not explored the problem area in sufficient depth, and that's why you're hearing new things over and over again. Another thing to note is that if you accidentally pick a problem area or a problem hypothesis sufficiently vast, it gives you a way to pivot. You can basically say, oh, this is too big of a problem hypothesis, I gotta break it down. And you might pick one or two sub-problem hypotheses and run with it for the next set of interviews. So you're able to make forward progress on your product planning without having to block on getting 60 interviews or 70 interviews done. So making sense of responses. So, I have, everybody, what I've always followed is that once I get the raw responses from the customers out, I try to build my own Excel sheet, and not everybody has to follow it. And if you do sufficiently low number, you probably have the data in your head. But given that we used to do 60 to 30 plus custom interviews, we used to be very systematic. We used to go over the interview notes. It's always good to have another person take notes. So that is one thing when you have a user researcher, it makes kind of sense because if she invites you to the meeting, you can take notes and she can focus on questions, because I've always felt it's kind of hard getting all the right info and getting the questions. Otherwise, you have to depend upon the recording, right? And not a lot of us have time to spend half an hour on the interview and then spend half an hour re-listening to the recording so you can actually transcribe what the customer said. So once you have all the data, you basically, for every customer, you put a check mark saying, hey, this guy validates my hypothesis, this does not validate my hypothesis. And a good rule of thumb that we've done is that your hypothesis is probably a solid place for you to start with if your 80% of the responses actually follow through validation or it invalidates. At that point, you basically pivot and figure out, hey, there's probably not the right set of level, or there's not the right hypothesis to go with. It also gives you an opportunity to look at surprises, right? If you see like the customers talking about pain points that are completely different from what you expected them to, then you pivot on new hypothesis and follow that line of thought and that line of interviewing with your customers so you get the right information out. Again, it's rats versus dens. It's always important to factor in emotion. When you really, hear people use the F word like 10 times, or really feel their frustration when they talk about the scenario, you can always guarantee that it's probably more of a rat than ever is a den, and that gives a higher weightage to what you would assign to that pain point, and that kind of flows automatically up the stack towards top of your priorities. And finally, like when you really understand rats, you have to make sure the product, even if you've built a product, or built a solution for these customers, that their behavior would change. You could build the most fantastic product, and if it's probably has, the first time user experience, or even the ramp up to getting there is slightly higher than you thought it would be, the customer is not going to use the product, then it's complete failure. So it's making sure the customer, the customer population that you're talking to is willing to change the behavior so that your problem in the solution hypothesis and the product you're building satisfies their pain points is very important to validate as part of the lean customer development. So that's actually all I had. It's a very quick talk. I would highly encourage you to, whenever you get time, read the lean customer development book. It's a little theory oriented, but I've always felt it gives a really good grounded understanding of how you want to think about customer development. It is a good process to keep in your head and has to follow when you think about talking to customers, taking notes, how you follow up, how you actually, condense all into a set of questions and answers that you want to feed back in product planning. It's a good mental model and a framework for you to trust your customer interviews on. And I put a link to the 95 ways to find your customers. It's pretty interesting for people struggling to find the right set of customers to talk to.
Excellent. Definitely, I'd recommend you post those links up to the Meetup page so people can actually access them. Again, thank you to our speaker, Harikrishna Menon, for product manager over at 2 Sigma, for his talk on lean customer development. And as always, the presentation will be posted on our SlideShare channel. And a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, to everyone else who joined us today, and the product mentor. And also don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor, like today's speaker, the product people of all sorts, visit theproductmentor.com and sign up today. And also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. And with all that said, I'll see you guys all very, very, very soon. Thank you. Bye.